Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Wow, holy mackerel! These I got new, I got new ear pads for the headphones, and they're making a big difference in what it sounds like to do this show. Okay, Well, anyway, I don't think it's going to matter. It's just going to be distracting for me. But what else is new? Good morning. It is Monday, again, February 7th, 2022. I don't know, I almost leapt forward to 2023 for some reason there. And yet, I don't know, here I was supposed to be worried about still writing 2021 on things, and I'm already jumping ahead to 2023. All right, ready to go with many things having happened over the weekend, and we will talk about some of those things when we speak to Greg Dworkin. We might even talk about some of those things before and after speaking to Greg Dworkin as well. There's a lot to chat about. Bill's morning tweet is here. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Kagro X, that's me, answers the question, where do solar panels go at night? I personally have no freaking clue. Yes, one of the many things that happened over the weekend. Basically, I guess today I could do the show without even really looking at Pocket. I'll just scroll backwards on my Twitter feed. And I really wasn't all that active on Twitter over the weekend, actually. But yet the quality is so high. Lots of people saying very high quality things, and me saying yes to that. And lots of stories developing in weird, some in weird and unpredictable ways. Most, however, in weird and predictable ways. And we can try and guess about which ones are which after we catch up with them in our discussion with Greg. But one of the things that happened over the weekend, last night as a matter of fact, the solar panel thing, it was an old tweet as it turned out. This is a nice beginning to the narrative. You like that? It was an old tweet as it turned out. The kind of tweet that makes me say, why of all the, tweet joints in the world did you have to walk into this one? From Josh Mandel, who is the Trumpiest of the Ohio Senate candidates for the Republicans. And I don't know what brought it up. Somebody must have retweeted it, or who knows. The Twitter algorithm decided that I needed to see it again. Boy, it really sounds like I have the bass on too high. And I don't know. Well, this is the same mix as always. So you're all hearing it the same way it's always been. It's just me with my new headphones. Anyway, Josh Mandel on January 12th, so it's been a while, tweeted as he was driving around, drove by these today, and these are snow-covered solar panels at a, I don't know whether I guess you would consider it a solar farm of sorts. These are panels that are on the ground, essentially. They're on little risers just lifted up. They're not rooftop solar. Driving by them, and some of them are snow-covered, but there's not a deep snow cover on the ground or anything. And Josh tweets, drove by these today, and my 8-year-old asked, Daddy, how do the solar panels work if they're covered in snow and the sun's not out? And then he adds his commentary to it. Turns out third graders are smarter than AOC, Elizabeth Warren, and every environmental wacko, she spells with an H, out there. I think the H spelling is disfavored, but that won't be the big points off there. The big points off there are, as I explained last night, and why everybody's who's on my feed is talking about that today. What happened here, Josh, isn't that you made some major discovery about the wisdom of solar energy or solar panel use. What happened is your 8-year-old stumped you. And this is not the big dunk on AOC or Elizabeth Warren or environmental wackos that you think it is, but I'm sure in your feed it is. But yeah, your 8-year-old asked the question, and as it turns out, about 5,000 people answered it by Googling, yeah, well, what's the actual answer to that? I mean, it's not that you can't be stumped by that question. If you're not an expert or, even passingly familiar with solar energy, you might say, yeah, well, what is the deal with that? And I mean, the deal with it is, well, as the kid asks, what happens when they're covered in snow and the sun's not out? Well, what happens when they're not covered in snow and the sun's not out? I mean, at night, solar panels aren't picking up solar rays and converting them into energy. That's just what happens. So plenty of answers to that, including, well, sometimes solar panels don't generate energy, but that's okay because, as you know, when you unplug a electric vehicle, it still drives. When you unplug your phone and try to make a call on it, it still drives, and that's called batteries. But anyway, what happens during the day when solar panels are covered in snow? So some people provided the answers, as they said. 10-second Google search, but he was driving. So, that's not when you should be Googling on your phone. Of course, you could say to your genius 8-year-old, Google it, find out what the answer is. That's how we learn in the world. Go look it up, like they say in the classroom. But we hate teachers or something, and I don't know, maybe he didn't have his gun on him, so he didn't feel like teaching. And instead, well, one of the big problems is his answer is, aha, my 8-year-old is smarter than AOC, Elizabeth Warren, etc. The other thing that happened here, besides being stumped by your 8-year-old, is that you said, my 8-year-old stumped me, so obviously other people are stupid. I don't know the answer to this question, so isn't AOC a dummy? Well, all right, as a rhetorical advice, it only works for Josh Mandel fans, I guess. But for everybody else, it's kind of annoying, and maybe you should look it up. And other people have looked it up. And by the way, the answer is, if it's a light dusting of snow, the sunlight goes right through, and it just generates electricity as normal. If it's a deep coating of snow, what usually happens is, within a reasonable amount of time, all it takes is for a little bit of melting on the surface, which is what happens as it's collecting sunlight. I mean, sunlight forward diffuses through the snow and warms the surface of the solar panels, and then that little bit, because they're tilted, that snow facing on it slides down a little bit. The little bit at the end, at the bottom, falls off, and a little bit at the top is exposed to the sunlight after all. And guess what? The whole panel doesn't actually have to be exposed in order for it to start generating electricity when the sunlight hits it. So anyway, that's the news. And I don't really know why he couldn't figure that out, or didn't think there was an answer, or thought, gosh, nobody has ever anticipated, precipitation from the sky on solar panels before. So I don't know. I guess that was new to him. And as I said also last night, I've never really understood at all the conservative opposition to it, other than the fact that they want you to be burning fossil fuels because that makes money for fossil fuel companies and they contribute to them. But I've always wondered what's the conservative argument for why not collect free electricity from the sky? Why would you want that? No, in America, we want to pay for our electricity and have hot dirt in this country. That's right. And when you have these things on that's shading the dirt, now the dirt is all cold, and all you have in exchange is free electricity. Never really got that, but I guess that's what counts for a dunk in Josh Mandel's world, and that's why you should not be doing anything like considering voting for him or anyone on his side of the ledger. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here, and he looks things up when he doesn't know the answer, so that makes him a good guy to talk to. The sort of person that I guess you could have a reasonable interview with and sell it for $100 million to Spotify, as a matter of fact.
I'm usually looking things up, so I don't have time for Spotify.
Oh, yeah, but that's the way that show works. So,
yeah, I know, which reminds me of a couple of things. I mean, there's so many different things we could mention. Firstly, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that if God had wanted you to collect electricity from the sky, he'd strike you with lightning. So if he didn't shut up, you don't have anything to talk about. and besides, it reminds me, when we were kids, right? The genius who wants to send a rocket not to the moon, but to the sun. Uh-huh. And when people point out it's too hot, he says, we'll just land at night. So that's Josh Mandel and his whole thing there with solar power. And, I was stumped by the concept here.
And now the kid's going to be he's going to be 9 and not know the answer.
But, if you're driving, you say, Alexa or, Siri, look it up for me. And, of course, the fact that didn't immediately occur to you reminds me of something else I saw, speaking of Spotify and Joe Rogan, and that was the meme that was going around, which I thought was pretty funny because of my age, which is the whole Neil Young, Joe Rogan dust up there.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Right? And so if you're under 25, it's like, who's Neil Young?
Right.
And if you're 25 to 65, it's, oh my God, Neil Young is still alive. And if you're over 65, it's what's Spotify?
Yeah.
And so, they're certainly got a marketing problem on their hand. And part of the problem is that now that Joe Rogan's name is in the news, everybody's going and listening to Joe Rogan episodes.
Which you'd think Spotify would be happy about.
Which you'd think Spotify would have done before they paid him $100 million. Because then they would have known that he interviewed Gavin McInnes of the Proud Boys. And I think I'm coming to the conclusion that Barack Obama wasn't born in this country. Mm-hmm. And then there were the 70 episodes with the N-word.
Right.
And it goes on and on and on. Every time you listen to a Joe Rogan episode, you go, oh, they should have pulled this one too.
Yeah. And then how much is left after, with $100 million worth? I mean, if you're losing 60 million,
it's become a big embarrassment, and it isn't cancel culture. And as we said when we did the Joe Rogan show last week, I'm not advocating that he be censored or that Spotify drop him. I think they should keep him, and just everybody should make fun of him. And basically, that's what's happening. Okay. And the fact that the Dude Bros keep defending him is telling you everything you need to know about Dude Bro culture.
That is true too. Who was it though? Crenshaw, the eye patch guy. I stand with Joe Rogan over the weekend, and then it was like, 70 episodes of the N-word. But I didn't see him spending his weekend saying, "Well, I don't stand with that," or "I take it back." He's
got great defenders like Andrew Yang.
Yeah, right. Who says he totally knows some people of color who would defend him. All right.
Well, not only that, he says obviously he's not racist because he works with black people all the time.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, that worked on the plantations.
That's right. That we're coworkers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
it was a lousy plantation. It's a co-op.
Right. It's just some of us are more co-op-y than others, I guess. Is what.
So, crazy stuff. And the thing is, he is who he is, so all this stuff's going to come out.
Yes.
And, but what part do you want to defend? We're not even talking about the vaccine stuff anymore.
Right. We're
talking about hardcore N-word use. Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. And I'm going to have some fascists on because I think it's really interesting. I think it's an interesting conversation that I want to have.
Right. That was always the basic problem, was that even the defense in the early stages was, well, he's A, just asking questions. B,
I'm just taking questions of the Nazis I invited onto my show multiple times.
Yeah, that's essentially it. Is that you ask dumb questions of dumb people. There was another one with Charles Johnson, the Nazi Charles Johnson, not the reformed former
Charles
Nazi.
C. Johnson.
Yes, right. There's a lot of Charles Johnsons who are questionable out there. But this one, the one who never the rage Furby, whose word was it for that? The redheaded guy. And we thought he kind of disappeared, and he did. He got kind of deplatformed and marginalized, and we haven't really heard much from him since. And this was reviving old episodes that he interviewed him, and he had a whole racial eugenics kind of a thing to go along with. And Joe Rogan's in the clip. I don't know. I didn't listen to the whole thing. In the clip, you hear him just saying, well, gee, gosh, is that really true? But sort of, he might be saying credulous. He doubts it.
It's a very credulous question. Right. It wasn't let's play along and let the guy,
So there was definitely some.
This isn't the Daily Show. Keep talking. Let me just keep the conversation going.
Oh. Yeah. I don't know. It didn't seem like he was totally buying into it. But I don't know. If for a program that's, this is the everyman's question. Like the everyman's answer to that is, what? Are you out of your mind? Where the hell did you hear that? That's the everyman answer to that. Not, gosh, really? But is that really true? No, that's not true. Where did you even come up with the idea that was true? What the hell are you doing? Yeah, right.
Last week's episode.
Right, pretty much. So anyway, lousy weekend for him. I'm sure more people leaving
Joe
Spotify.
Rogan he was interviewing yet another nutcase.
Yeah.
Well, where did you even come up with that? Said Joe Rogan to the nutcase, and the nutcase says on the Joe Rogan show last week.
The other guy you talked to, who was me. Yeah. So lots of it's filled with more of the same. I guess they sort of astroturfed their own radio show.
Well, but he is who he is, so you have a pretty good idea now. Even if you have never listened to the Joe Rogan show, you have a pretty good idea of who he is. Yep. Meanwhile, Josh Mandel, I'm afraid we're going to get to know a little bit more than we want to. David Frum has a nice piece in The Atlantic on the Ohio Senate race, speaking of which, since you brought it up. And it's actually about one of the relatively nice people, on the Republican side who dropped out.
Yeah?
His name is Bernie Moreno. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I don't think so.
At one point, he was considered to be the perfect Republican candidate.
Wow, he must have great hair.
Well, he's 54 years old, and he was hugely accomplished in private life. He built one of the nation's largest network of auto dealerships. He founded an Ohio-based technology incubator called Onum.
How does he spell that?
Ownum.
Yeah, all right. I own them. Right. Okay.
It's like orichalcum from Atlantis. Before joining the Republican Party, Moreno, like those previous Ohio senators, espoused fundamentally moderate politics, backed John Kasich. Only at the last minute did Moreno realize he needed to jump aboard the train of Trump radicalism.
Yes.
So he did.
Oh.
In 2020, Moreno tweeted congratulations to Biden and Harris for their hard-fought victory. And he urged fellow Republicans to accept the decision of 140 million votes cast, but that was then. This is now.
Yeah.
He comes from a relatively prominent family in native Colombia.
All right.
Right. His brother served as Colombia's Minister of Economic Development. So I guess, he's well-heeled and well-connected there. But he made his career in the U.S. at General Motors, and he was appalled by Donald Trump's rise, but he needed to run. So he rolls out one of the most expensive ad campaigns in the history of the state's primary politics, according to David Frum, mostly self-funded. His TV ads juxtapose his own personal feel-good story with hard-edged denunciations of socialism and cancel culture. And one of them was called Buckle Up, and it was an appropriate name because it offered a lurching, herky-jerky experience that would never be tolerated in one of the fine Mercedes automobiles Moreno sells.
Oh.
He opened the spot by telling the heartwarming story of his family's arrival in America, which is true. I mean, that's the kind of thing that should sell, but not these days. The soft-strumming guitar music abruptly shifts to angry horns, as if it's the Ottawa trucker protest. The family came, Moreno explained, to escape the socialism of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara.
What?
Violent dictators just like Bernie Sanders and AOC. And so it goes.
I thought he was from Colombia.
He's fighting cancel culture, a husband and dad who wants to preserve the American dream from scary brown women in hijabs and window-smashing Antifa.
But I thought he was from Colombia.
Well, but, he didn't win. He's out.
Oh, okay. But, yeah, something
so,
Cuba,
hey,
something
listen,
brown
you gotta,
people.
It's all about narrative and optics, right?
Yeah,
Frum writes, the candidates in Ohio are all, of course, tremendous phonies. Mandel, the frontrunner, also supported Marco Rubio over Trump in 2016.
He was bad this weekend, too. Yeah.
Running a little behind is Jane Timken, a Harvard-educated lawyer who married into one of Ohio's most prominent business dynasties.
I don't even know
One of her uncles-in-law served as ambassador to Germany under G.W. Bush. She donated to Kasich's 26th presidential run, but she's running against the others as the Trump conservative who wiped out the Kasich establishment. And I'm not even going to talk about J.D. Vance. He says everybody knows about J.D. Vance.
We know him. It's with the other two we don't. That's interesting. I mean,
But some of the candidates have weaker gag reflexes than others and can better choke down all the toads that need to be swallowed to be viable in post-Trump Ohio politics. Moreno couldn't fake sufficient toad-eating enthusiasm, so he's out. Even in defeat, humiliations haven't ceased. He ended his campaign by flying to Mar-a-Lago. In a written statement, Moreno explained the race contained too many Trump candidates and pledged to support not to the winner of the vote, but to whichever candidate Donald Trump endorses.
Wow, that's
In return, he received a condescending pat on the head.
Why bother?
I was impressed with Bernie, who was tough on illegal immigration, which after the Biden disaster at the border has become a big issue for all candidates, Trump said in a statement. So,
he played along.
Look, Trump obviously he thinks he has a future in politics, so he's trying to stay on the right side of his party, which is a bunch of nutcases.
Right.
But that's Ohio politics for you.
Yeah, so maybe, so he's preserving himself for governor or
whatever.
Something else. Okay, the other Senate seat. All right, I get it.
I have a lot of money, and I want to run for something, so I'll just do whatever I need to do. And look, if I have to say that I'm from Cuba, even though I'm not, or at least imply it, I will. Or, Maybe I'll imply that I'm from Venezuela, or if I need to, I'll imply I'm from South Africa. I don't care. I just want to win.
Right. Yeah. Why not throw you escaped Stalin in there too?
Hungary. I'm from Hungary. You guys like Hungary. I'm from Hungary.
Yeah, that's me.
That's me.
The dreadful Hungarian.
That dreadful Hungarian?
Yeah, that's the one. I usually think of, what's his name? Seb Gorka. That's who I bought that little clip for. But okay. Whatever. That's Ohio. And so for all his work and however much he spent, we'd never heard of him. I never had. Not on this show anyway. Nobody who listens to the show knows that guy. All right. Well, that's Ohio. Oh, Marco Rubio made the news. I noticed his performance on the Sunday shows spectacular in ducking the question of whether or not Mike Pence was right in saying that Trump was wrong in saying that Pence could steal the election for him. That was interesting. And the question was put to him, do you agree with Mike Pence? And he said, this was an interesting answer. I don't want Kamala Harris to have the power to change the outcome of the next election. I'm sure that if Donald Trump runs against Joe Biden, he'll win. And I don't want Kamala Harris to have the power to undo that. And whoever was hosting whatever damn show he was on pressed him on it and said, does that mean you think Trump's wrong? No, I just don't want Kamala Harris to have that power.
Well, that's really the point there, right? When given the opportunity, he didn't vote to impeach.
Right.
And let me contrast and compare somebody who was also on the Sunday shows.
Sure.
Who was Chris Christie.
That guy.
Chris Christie said, and I quote, January 6th was a riot incited by Donald Trump, specifically to pressure Pence to try to overturn the election. He wanted the election to be overturned.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So Rubio didn't say, the point here is that Trump lost. He didn't say that.
No.
He can't say that. He can't bring himself to say that.
He did not say that.
Christie's clearly saying Trump lost and January 6th was a riot that Trump incited. Okay?
Yeah.
Those are the facts.
He's
Those
quite correct there.
Facts.
And hard to say if you're
I'm not
Republican.
saying that you could be convicted for that. That's up to the courts. But that's what happened.
I say it.
And so Rubio can't bring himself to say it. So he weasels out of it and says, let me change the topic. Let me move the goalposts. You want to know whether Donald Trump won or lost or whether he's responsible for January 6th. I'm saying the super big issue for me as a senator are the powers of the vice president in this particular situation, which never came up before but did that day. And so let's debate the fine points of what Mike Pence can and cannot do. And don't ask me about whether or not Trump won or lost. That's irrelevant. The real important part is this tiny little procedural piece that I'm going to, nail to my forehead so that everybody understands that I didn't say Donald Trump lost.
Yeah, right. So he ducks the question twice. I thought a good comment on it. Peter Manso commenting on it, saying that this was, as he sets it up, this is precisely Pence's move obscured by his supposed bravery. But I thought the more important point, as he says, you talk about overturning an election as something that Democrats would do rather than something the Republicans have already tried. He won't acknowledge that's what happened that day. That's what he was trying to do.
That's what Chris Christie said. That's why it was so interesting. And he wasn't the only one that said that. And so it's kind of interesting
see how long it lasts.
That as January 6th, sort of closes in on what's going on with the Trump scheme here.
Yes, the committee, right? Okay.
Right. That there are Republicans, including Mark Short, who was Pence's chief of staff, I think.
Yes, I think so.
And Chris Christie and others basically are saying, no, it was a riot and then January 6th was bad. Why are they doing that now? Probably because the National Archives got a hold of a lot of the stuff that went back and forth between their office and everybody else, and they're trying to make themselves look good in what they presume is going to be something that looks really bad.
Yeah, if they can put the papers back together again and read them.
Well, or fetch them. There's a story this morning in the Washington Post. Right. National Archives had to retrieve Trump White House records from Mar-a-Lago. The recovery of multiple boxes from Trump's Florida resort, including letters from Barack Obama and Kim Jong-un, underscore the previous administration's cavalier handling of presidential records. There were reports that he ripped everything up as a matter of habit because that's what mob bosses do. Yep. And so he had aides actually probably from the Office of Legal Counsel who followed him around, and their job was to give them to the interns to piece back together
If they did it.
You know, like in that the
yeah.
movie from Iran rescuing the hostages.
Oh, the Canadians rescuing the Iran?
Yeah, Canadians rescue the hostages.
Yeah.
And in leaving, the U.S. Shredded everything, but the Iranians had a whole system where they put school children together to, piece the documents so that they could get them back.
It's good work if you can get
it. And those people were subsequently hired by the Office of Legal Counsel to do the same thing to Donald Trump's papers because he did the same thing.
Iranians, it's true. Yeah, that was quite a story. The fact that he has anything from the White House, I mean, I guess, I don't know how they recovered them exactly. I would like to, I'll read that story and figure that out, but I think they should be doing some more searching in Mar-a-Lago. First of all, if it has any crawl spaces, search those. Secondly, the plain fact of it is they'll probably find more. So far, we're concentrating on the papers, but the plain fact of it is, just like everybody suspected he would, Donald Trump left the White House with government property and took it with him back to Mar-a-Lago to squirrel away. So,
obviously these are love letters to me personally, so yes. They didn't really count as government,
including the ones from Barack Obama. I'm sure they were love letters.
Well, they were, because it was, I'm leaving, you're coming, so congratulations to you, and I'm framing it and putting it on my wall.
All right. Well, there's that one, but yeah, and then the Kim Jong-un thing, like, okay.
Well, those are personal love letters.
Yeah, I'm sure he does think so. Yeah, but thank you. We'll be the judge of that. In fact, we actually have some judges who will judge that, and now we'll get a look at that. I'd like to know what else is hiding down there. What else might Melania be trying to auction off? Whatever. There's a lot of questions unanswered.
Her citizenship papers, I think.
That would be something.
Are we supposed to have a press conference about that?
Yes, right. It's coming up after these messages, I think, or very shortly thereafter, within a very short period of time. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Quick jump back in. All right, you had a whole plan. I'm canceling it. Give us another plan. Greg.
Yeah, well, this is Mike Tyson's strategy, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
That's right.
So I had a whole plan about how I was going to do the show, and of course, it never works out that way. Ever. Never,
ever.
Matter.
This is worth $100 million the way we do this show.
Right. Well, as Mark Berman put it on Twitter just the other day, it's physically impossible for any discourse around a podcast to not quickly become an embarrassing quagmire for like 400 different people. So really, it's the quintessential American art form of the 21st century. I'm just telling David he's an artist is what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, I'll change my name, all sorts of things.
Right, and so, that's deep. Here's shallow. Somebody, Colin McAuliffe, was just writing about his, personal experiences, because that's what people do on Twitter.
Sure.
And he said, Netflix removed a bunch of My Little Pony episodes, and my daughters have decided that I personally am responsible for this, which was sort of, amusing and interesting, until Stephen White, who's a political scientist, said, well, actually, this is how swing voters view the presidency.
Okay. That's probably true.
And it is true.
Does it work for Netflix?
Joe Biden is responsible for gas prices, the economy, and the fact that we had an Omicron surge.
Yeah.
So we're going to fund a bunch of people to go up to Canada, and we're going to have the trucks blare their horns all night
Yes.
Because we want Justin Trudeau to go, because don't try to make logic out of it.
Yes, Chip Roy says he did go. He's hiding in the United States. That's not true.
There's a lot going on. I mean, this is I have a couple of pieces from the Canadian press which are kind of interesting, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to finish up what we were talking about here, because I have this piece from Dan Balls, who was, you can't get any more mainstream than Dan Balls. He's writing in the Washington Post.
Just plain balls.
And so when the New York Times and the Washington Post get around to saying, well, it appears pretty clear that Trump was trying to steal the election and overturn it, then I think that it's now become ingrained that that's in fact what he was doing, and that's why you have people like Chris Christie, talking about it on TV. I don't think he's at risk with the January 6th committee the way Mark Short is. But nonetheless, folks are saying it. So the title of Dan Balls' piece is, "This was the week when Trump revealed all. He really did want to overturn the 2020 election. He never meant it when he said those who broke the law on January 6th should have to pay."
Okay, I was afraid that was going to end with finally became president.
It's not a Dana Bash piece, but there it is.
All right.
If the vice president, Mike Pence, had absolutely no right to change the presidential election results in the Senate despite fraud and many other irregularities, how come the Democrats and rhino Republicans like wacky Senator Susan Collins from Maine are desperately trying to pass legislation that won't allow the vice president to change the results? Actually, what they're saying is that Mike Pence did have the right to change the outcome, and they now want to take that right away. Unfortunately, he didn't exercise the power. He could have overturned the election. That was his famous statement from, what was it, a week ago?
Yeah, something like that.
Right? And Ball says, look, the last line of that statement is as blatant as Trump has been about his true intentions, to overturn a fair election. But it was written in such a matter-of-fact way that many who read it will give it a ho-hum, there he goes again reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Of course he wanted to overturn the election, a reader might say, so what's new? Time to move on. And that's exactly the danger that continues to exist, a weariness with all of it, a desire to put those difficult moments from early 2021 in the rearview mirror. Now, that reminds me of the parents who don't want to read about how bad Omicron and COVID can be for their kids because it's scary, so they're just not going to read it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean.
Okay, and that's why that line about, basically your regular average voter blames the president for My Little Pony getting pulled from Netflix,
Right.
I don't want to read about it. I don't want to know the facts. I just want to know who to blame.
All right.
So speaking Friday at a gathering of the Federalist Society in Florida, they are apparently not too embarrassed to still meet, given everything that happened with their judges. Pence rebuked the former president as he called January 6th a dark day in the history of the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
This week, our former president said, I had the right to overturn the election. President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. He could have just said, and we lost. And that's the important part. But, of course, he didn't, and neither did Marco Rubio. So Friday was the day on which future battle lines are being drawn inside the Republican Party with a handful of elected officials, including Romney, standing up for Cheney and Kinzinger, while so many others, symbolized by the Republican National Committee, following along Trump's dangerous path. I'm sure you covered that. They consider the right to be legitimate political discourse. And then they said, well, no, we don't mean that part of it is legitimate political discourse. We're talking about all the people who went to the rally, but not the Capitol. And we didn't say that, but that's what we meant.
Right.
Wink, wink. Let's have it both ways. And, of course, nobody's having it.
We didn't mean Medicare should wither on the vine. We meant the Healthcare Financing Agency, HCFA, that everybody's always talking about. I remember that play. Okay.
Right. So the House Committee investigating the events surrounding what happened on January 6th continues to gather evidence, including documents from the Trump White House, where they can get them, I might add, and will hold public hearings later this year and issue a report. Expect more revelations in the months ahead. Still strong is the belief that because it didn't happen, it can't happen. But Trump continues to reveal himself, his true motives, and perhaps what he would do if he were again to become president. Nobody should be surprised. That's the important thing, When you get hauled out to the camps for re-education, right, you should not be surprised. That's the important warning that the Washington Post is giving us. And that's about all they're going to do about it.
All right. Well, at least I won't be surprised.
But, the thing it's not that this is an incredibly deep observation. It's that it's an observation by Dan Balls, who is as centrist as you can get.
Yes.
And so even the centrists, the both sides, or even the, oh, my goodness, tut-tut, middle
All right.
of reporting from Washington, the inside the Beltway stuff, is like, you can't hide this anymore.
Yeah. Now you're allowed
There's
to
no
talk
plausible
about it.
deniability. It's gone.
You were a dirty hippie thinking this up until now, but now you're okay.
But now that I've seen it,
yes,
it's now conventional wisdom.
That's
the fact that you guys saw it years ago. Forget you're DFHs.
All right, but you're used to this.
But
now.
We, the moderate, cautious people, now see it, and therefore it must be true.
Well,
That's
make
okay.
it true.
We're used to that. See a rock, see blogging.
Right. I'll take it when you can get it.
Exactly. I'm more than happy to credit Dan Baltz for this fascinating, insightful observation, as long as he keeps spreading it to the rest of America so they understand.
Right. So long as he doesn't now view himself as done, I have said this. Okay.
Well, there's too much coming out for it to be done.
I hope
it keeps not being done.
I don't know what else you're going to do.
As I've maintained all along, there are so many reporters who are in the building that they're not going to let that go.
Yeah, I hope that still holds. It sounds like it. Okay. Good. I'm glad that we have this.
So Ottawa. Let's talk a little bit about Ottawa.
All right. It's in Canada.
That's
about it.
From the Ottawa. Is this the one from the Ottawa Citizen? No, this is the one from the Washington Post. So it's not behind a paywall. It may be behind a paywall, but it was a little bit more accessible. Ottawa declares state of emergency amid continuing blockades and raucous protests over COVID measures. Police announced Sunday they would continue road closures into the downtown core into the week.
Aha. So that's, blocking traffic. That's their big...
Protests over coronavirus public health measures, because the Trucking Association in Canada has said, this is not our protest. Like 96% of our truckers are vaccinated. But there's a requirement in Canada that if you go into the United States and come back, you have to be vaccinated. Because the U.S., of course, is a hotbed of COVID.
Yes. I don't know whether they require vaccination for the truckers inside of Canada, but we keep hearing from Ricky in Prince Edward Island that people can't leave the province without paperwork, which, different than the United States. It's a different country. They have their own system. So it may be that you can't really work as a long-haul trucker without vaccination in Canada, which is a great thing. But a couple of guys think it's a bad thing, even though they may already be vaccinated. But they're going to protest. And apparently, I saw some video from the weekend, too. They are just also honking their horns all night.
Well, they're doing more than that. They're threatening healthcare workers.
Yes.
I mean, there were some
they threatened
advisories from Vancouver and other cities that if you are a healthcare worker, don't wear your scrubs out on the street on your way to work, which you're not supposed to do anyway.
At you.
But this is a summary from the Ottawa Citizen, which was having a blow-by-blow, little a two-paragraph blurb live as this was going on. Okay. The Freedom Convoy that converged in Ottawa a week ago started in response to the federal government's, that's the Canadian federal government's, move to require that all Canadian truck drivers crossing the U.S. border be fully vaccinated.
All right. So
the Canadian Trucking Alliance, the main advocacy body for truckers, has disavowed the protest, saying the vast majority of its members are fully vaccinated and are continuing to work. The core organizers of the protest insist that they are not anti-vaccine, just oppose mandates that require vaccination for people to work, and that's why they're yelling at healthcare workers.
Yeah, because of something. We don't oppose vaccines, just the people who administer them to us.
Right. So a very interesting part of it here. Physicians, nurses, and healthcare workers across the country released an open letter earlier in the day to Canadians saying they will not hide out of fear of violence from hate-fueled convoys. We will not cower. We will not hide. We'll wear our scrubs in public without fear, knowing you, Canadians, have our backs.
Okay, but you're not supposed to wear those scrubs.
Jerry Fiore, chair of the Ottawa Disability Coalition, also released a letter addressed to Premier Doug Ford, Mayor Jim Watson, and Councilwoman Diane Deans, urging them to put a swift end to the downtown protest. The Ottawa Disability Coalition demands you immediately take all actions necessary to restore rights and freedoms of the residents of this occupied area and those who provide comfort and services. The protest must be put to an end and the area cleaned. While the Ottawa Disability Coalition recognizes the rights of people of freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom of choice, it also recognizes the rights of everybody to the freedom of movement, freedom to life, liberty, and the security of person.
That's the Canadian way.
Right. Meanwhile, the Ottawa police issued a news release stating that the service was working with U.S. authorities to investigate email-based threats to public officials, More than 150 calls have been made in the hate-related hotline. Also, police said they continue to use the search and contain strategy, focusing on preventing and reducing the impact of the truck protesters. We continue to advise demonstrators not to enter Ottawa and to go home.
Okay.
Right? Police teams continue to gather financial, digital, vehicle registration, driver identification, insurance status, and other related evidence to be used in criminal prosecutions.
All right.
So while that's going on, okay,
yeah.
That's the Ottawa Citizen. This piece is from the National Observer, also a Canadian paper.
Yeah.
Canada's National Observer, in case you're not sure.
Yeah.
And Sandy Garasino's an opinion columnist and says, startling Trump interference points to GoFundMe convoy campaign manipulation.
Can we call
this is
caravan,
where it starts to come home here.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, this is where the fraud enters.
Yes,
Let's
and
bring
the
it
GoFundMe stuff. And Ken Paxton and Ron DeSantis trying to divert attention away from the fact that the Ottawa convoy is being funded from the United States.
Right. Because otherwise, what's the point? What do these guys have to do with anything?
Right.
It's Canada.
So where does that come in? As the defeated ex-president Donald Trump threw his weight behind the Ottawa protests for a second time, lashing out at GoFundMe for suspending payments to organizers of the 10 million Freedom Convoy, remember this.
Caravan.
His former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, is currently under indictment for wire fraud and money laundering over his $32 million Build a Wall GoFundMe campaign.
Yes.
So there is some background for that. Trump is endorsing the Ottawa convoy, calling Justin Trudeau a far-left lunatic who has destroyed Canada, and backing an attempt to bring a similar truck protest to D.C.
Hooray.
Now,
yeah, and everywhere else.
That campaign, one of the largest in GoFundMe history, was, as they say, canceled. So if you think there's something extremely fishy about the GoFundMe Freedom campaign, because he's referring to Steve Bannon's, you're onto something. The campaign is extremely suspect. I've spent almost 30 years involved with studying and writing about the Canadian nonprofit and charitable sector. Not only is the interference by Trump and his flunkies unprecedented, the campaign's donation pattern is wholly unreliable. To my knowledge, just looking at the data itself, the irregularities are a 5-alarm fire.
No.
The convoy campaign, organized by a previously obscure Canadian group, now ranks as the 8th largest in GoFundMe's 12-year history.
All of a sudden.
Right? It joins the pantheon of fundraisers supported by the family of George Floyd, victims of the Parkland shooting, the Pulse shooting, Time's Up related to Me Too, and major American COVID-19 relief projects.
But
at the time of its suspension from GoFundMe, the convoy campaign had racked up approximately $10.1 million in 2 weeks. Now, any Canadian fundraiser, she writes, will tell you this number is impossible to achieve organically within Canada. This group is not a registered charity, nonprofit, or even a trucking organization. Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly is on record saying there is significant influence and money pouring in from the United States. GoFundMe didn't independently verify donor identities and accepted foreign funds for a campaign that has one objective, the dissolution of Parliament, just months after a free and fair election in which 60% of the electorate voted for parties supporting vaccine mandates. As a Canadian broadcasting company, CBC, has reported on January 28th, at least a third of the donors were anonymous or faked. Donations were made in the names of Justin Trudeau, et cetera, et cetera. For more direct Canadian context, the 2018 fund for the Humboldt Broncos also ranks in the top 10. That effort raised $15 million from 142,000 donors for bereaved families. And the false identities are not the only abnormality. Most of the top 10 campaigns fall into 2 categories, either American COVID relief or victim support for traumatic violence events, such as Humboldt, George Floyd's murder, or Parkland, Las Vegas Pulse shootings. In cases where there's been a political facet to a successful campaign, it's been a vastly higher profile with established organizational capacity and public participation on a mass scale. So the advance billing of the protest was impressive.
Yes.
Former NHL legend Theo Fleury told Fox News that 50,000 trucks and 1.4 million Canadians would participate. By comparison, police estimates put the Ottawa convoy about 8,000 to 15, with just a few hundred commercial haulers. And by midweek, fewer than 300 demonstrators remained on the ground. Although if you have 300 trucks blaring, that's like a lot of noise.
It's noisy and smelly and dirty, and they're also not particularly, respectful of local law in terms of, say, disposal of waste, etc.
Right. On Friday, a lawsuit against the Freedom Convoy was filed by Ottawa citizens seeking damages for emotional distress caused by the incessant noise of truck horns. And tellingly, 60 trucks are named in the suit. So you're reading about this entire giant thing, and actually it's dwindled quite a bit. It's not 1.5 million people. It's like 60 trucks.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you're looking for defendants, you're not going to stop. So all you do is you go around and look for trucks. And 60 was all they could find.
Well, they're kind of hard to hide the trucks.
Yeah.
Right. We'll disguise it as a snowbank. Nobody will know. Which may explain the necessity of constant noise and stunts to keep media from noticing how few Canadians actually are involved. This is not George Floyd. It's not Parkland. It's not the Women's March. For all the Sturm und Drang, nice choice of words there, the convoy is an extraordinarily weak national turnout in a country where 500,000 showed up to a climate march in Montreal, or 60,000 to a marijuana celebration in Vancouver. Absent the trucks, which are really just big noisy props, it was essentially a national anti-vax rally, which has now turned so dangerous police are afraid to break it up. Mm-hmm. The low turnout's even more surprising in the midst of massive American promotion. Fox News, Donald Trump Jr., Tucker Carlson, Mike Flynn, Joe Rogan, and many others. In case you didn't know who Joe Rogan was.
No.
It's been relentlessly promoted on social media by, among others, Rebel Media, Pizzagate alumnus Jack Posobiec. With his 1.6 million followers, Posobiec, the Roger Stone acolyte, is widely regarded as the voice of Trump's ID. ID.
Oh, I see. Yes, okay.
ID.
Yeah. ID.
Right? With all this in mind, this exercises the hallmarks of an operation, complete with the potential for wire fraud, money laundering, and possibly a dry run for an American uprising. So given the Convoy Project's stated objective of overturning the results of a free and fair election, a thorough investigation of the GoFundMe campaign is now a matter of urgent national security importance. The time for answers and accountability is right now. And at the time of publication, GoFundMe issued a statement saying organizers provided a clear distribution plan for the initial $1 million that was released earlier this week, and confirmed funds will be used only for participants who travel to Ottawa to participate in a peaceful protest. Given how this situation has evolved, no further funds will be directly distributed to the Freedom Convoy organizers. We will work with organizers to send all remaining funds to credible and established charities verified by GoFundMe. They're refunding it, but you can't refund it to Justin Trudeau, and that was a fake.
I think they should.
So they're taking the 1/3
send it to Justin Trudeau.
Fake
you can't
contributions from fake donors, and they're giving that away, and that is what Ron DeSantis and Ken Paxton, a crook in his own right, are threatening to, quote, investigate, unquote, because they don't want people to know that this was probably a Bannon-fueled, or Bannon-style-fueled, I should say, because we have there's nothing whatsoever linking Bannon with this, only that he's tried this before with the wall.
Yes.
So this is a Bannon-style.
And would be very excited to try it again. Yeah, Bannon style. I wouldn't be surprised if it does turn out that he is behind it, but they're hiding behind fake
whether it's
names.
Bannon adjacent or not remains to be seen, with Posobiec and others pushing this.
Yeah, sure.
But, the point is, it's phony.
So it appears, and I see that DeSantis and Paxton are complaining, well, we're involved because Texans and Floridians gave their good, hard-earned money to this, and GoFundMe is stealing it and misappropriating it. And, of course, if you're not getting your money back, it's because you gave it fraudulently with a fake name. So liars and fraudsters here in my state need to be protected and get their money back. No, they don't. They deserve to lose their money, and you should not be commenting on this Canadian political movement. Stay out. But, that's their habit. And no one respects international borders when there are points to be scored. So, okay, this is what's going on, and it follows a familiar pattern, to be sure. And I guess we'll find out in the coming months that all the things that have been happening here before with other frauds that are Bannon-driven or Bannon-adjacent are happening again because, I don't know, we just keep letting this guy roam around for free. Roam around free and to do it for free. But yeah, they're trying to replicate this in the United States. I guess they've picked a date for assembling people. I think it might have been was it maybe even Valentine's Day, that they're trying to do the same thing. By the way, I won't call them convoy. I go with caravan because they hate that word for whatever reason. And apparently someone trying to do the same thing in New Zealand, which seems like
Convoy is a popular song, and Caravan is the thing that Ed Gillespie couldn't win with in Virginia. Right. So obviously Convoy is the thing to use.
I guess I use Caravan because they are a disease-carrying caravan crossing international borders or whatever, and blah, 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 the sort of thing that they frown upon ordinarily, which also leads me to, I happened to see, I think, Paul Waldman saying over the weekend.
No relation.
Right, but good comparison nonetheless, that when liberal protesters of any sort block traffic for an hour or so, the Republican response is to submit bills in the state legislature legalizing running them over if they're in your way. When conservative 60 truckers honk their horns all night and block all traffic in and out of the national capital for a week, they are, of course, patriots, even though they're from a completely different country. And we're going to send them as much as we can through GoFundMe, even if it involves fraud. An interesting dichotomy, to be sure. But, more gimmitarianism there. No surprise. Mm-hmm. So, phooey on them. And I don't know if that's going to work in New Zealand. I don't know if you can drive trucks from island to island or not. But at any rate, somebody noting on Twitter that they're being a little more explicit. There's fewer people and therefore fewer truckers involved in New Zealand. And, of course, New Zealand's been pretty vigilant in their anti-COVID efforts. So I don't think it's quite as popular. But apparently they have to get that much more explicit in their messaging. So they're apparently writing "Kill Jacinda" on their trucks. Like, okay, that's way out there in terms of legitimate discourse or legitimate political discourse.
So since we mentioned it, and since we just had a little soliloquy about what was going on with that truck convoy and how fake it was, mm-hmm. and how they're going to charge or thinking about charging 60 trucks.
Yes, right.
Okay. This is from the Toronto Sun, dated January 26, 2022. Country is in revolt. Joe Rogan talks Ottawa-bound truck convoy. This is good because it gives you an idea of the sort of way that Rogan and the Dude Bros sort of approach this stuff.
Yeah.
He's amazed by the convoy of trucks heading toward Ottawa. At the top of Wednesday's edition of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, Rogan asked his guest, an ex-lawyer turned chef, author and Montreal native Valentine Thomas, whether she was aware of the convoy which was headed to Ottawa. Your country's in revolt. Did you know about this? And, of course, she knew nothing about it. Mm-hmm. It's a giant convoy of trucks. It's apparently some insane amount of people. 50,000 trucks are headed to Ottawa to protest the vaccine mandates.
Yeah. Gosh,
Rogan told
really
Thomas,
true?
who was unaware of the convoy, that all the truckers were Canadian. Apparently, they're all being mandated to be vaccinated. They're like, hey, we're not even in contact with anybody. We're in our truck like we just drive.
A very thorough research job.
A complete, terrible journalistic job of explaining what truckers do.
Yes. Right.
Let alone how many people are involved, what the origins are, and what this is all about.
Yes.
And that, in a nutshell, is Joe Rogan.
Okay. There you go. Good job, Joe Rogan. Well done. I understand he actually kind of classified himself for a while. Is he does he believe himself to be a comedian?
Hard to know, because there were all sorts of defensive comedian tweets about him. Yeah. I don't get that. I think one of the key things about being a comedian, and I say this as an amateur, from the sidelines, I am not a comedian. I didn't go to comedian school. I have no degrees here.
Right.
But I think comedians are supposed to be funny.
That's why
I have a hard time saying Bill Maher is a comedian or Dennis Miller.
Yeah. Well, right.
How can they be comedians? They're not funny.
Bad comedians?
They can be something else. They could be interviewers. They could be personalities. They can be hosts.
And that's kind of what we're going for now.
Comedian? No, you have to be funny to be a comedian. You have to tell jokes, and the jokes have to be funny.
Now, is he what made him famous originally? Was he a UFC fighter? Is that right?
I think. I don't know.
Okay, so then he had the show, and it's been on for a long time. It was YouTube for a million years, and they had a lot of episodes, many of which are now gone because Spotify doesn't want them anymore. But yeah, so also UFC fighter / comedian / social commentator / podcaster /
well, according to Wikipedia,
yeah,
Joe Rogan is an American podcaster, Ultimate Fighting Championship color commentator, comedian, actor.
Was he ever in it? I mean, he might have been. I don't know. Okay.
And former television presenter. So he did color commenting. He looks like he was a UFC guy.
I mean, sometimes you don't make it in UFC or whatever sport, and so commentating is a thing.
And he actually had a stand-up career from 1988 to 1994, which is where the comedy stuff comes in.
And then got into the fighting came after that, I think, right? There was no UFC in 88 to 94, so comedian turned punch your face, turned talk about people punching faces, turned I'm just asking questions / comedian again guy. All right,
I don't know.
That's an arc.
Sure. He's a guy,
Yeah, and every
guy's
man
guy
who just can't tell the difference between when people are pulling his leg and doing their own research or whatever. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do I care if I start an international incident? Not my problem.
Right. Well, it hasn't worked. So, okay. Well, all right. That's a pretty good summary of, the state of the world at this point, but also the weekend's activity. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome. So that was going on. Mondays try to be a summary of 4 or 5 days of what happened? What the heck was that?
Yes.
And then on Wednesday, maybe we'll get a little bit more granular.
Okay, right. Granular lightning by Wednesday, I would guess. That's true. Okay, well, I think that wraps up nicely. There's still lots of detail we can fill in on all those things. We hit all the highlights. And, all right, see you on Wednesday. Appreciate it. And now we'll play some music. And then a break will come up and we'll disguise you're hanging up on Skype. I know that's the way you like it. Thanks, Greg. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. Speaking as we were of Paul Waldman, I think I grabbed another of his tweets here, and this one I pocketed for whatever reason. But this, too, a good point about the weird stories, which we'll see whether I end up reading the stories of Trump and his shredding habits, and now the discovery that at least some of his presidential papers are languishing in boxes at Perva-Lago instead of where they belong in the National Archives, Lago. And Paul makes this point: the key to the stories about Trump's serial violation of the Presidential Records Act is that he was repeatedly told he was breaking the law, but he kept doing it. That is his habit of tearing up documents. And people said, Mr. President, you may or may not know that your habits as a private businessman won't fly here in the Oval Office. You can't destroy paperwork like that. And I don't think he ever bothered to tell him, screw you, I'm the president, I can do whatever I want. He just kept doing it. And as Paul points out, same with the Hatch Act. His whole administration's attitude was that obeying the law was optional, that it was for suckers and little people, and they don't do this sort of thing. And that's, I think amply demonstrated by what we see in these stories. Not that I have yet read all the way through the stories, but I've gotten a flavor for what's going on. I guess I figured that we would be sharing that here on the show, reading through it. But let me just see what else we have to share that I've put away. I happened to notice another morning event via Twitter, and since we were talking earlier about Chris Christie, we can also talk about activities of the current governor of New Jersey. I guess in response to all the people, even many of whom have been cautious and careful throughout the pandemic, now feeling like, gosh, we should be returning to normal. Just wanted to demonstrate that this was possible so that my own current governor, Glenn Youngkin, knew that this was, it's a quiver, or it's an arrow in the quiver. You could have done this in New Jersey, where there was likewise a worrisome showing by Republicans, but no claim that they had actually won the election, as opposed to the way we did it down here. But also facing calls, I guess, for an end to the statewide or the state level mandate that students and school staff in public schools wear masks. Only they are taking a slightly different approach. Ed O'Keefe reporting here, if I can open this up from Twitter, that New Jersey Governor Murphy plans to announce later Monday, that's today, that his state, and that's New Jersey, will no longer require students and staff to wear masks. An official familiar with the decision confirms to CBS News. Now, we're not done here. And New Jersey, of course, has all throughout the pandemic been pretty hard hit in terms of the number of cases and the number of deaths. There was a lull for a while, and that was great, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. And then they got hit hard by Omicron again, and the numbers were jumping again. It's been tough in New Jersey. So for the New Jersey governor to declare an end to the mask mandate is really something. But what is that something? Well, it is as it should be in other states. The statewide mask mandate will be dropped. However, local school districts will continue to have flexibility to require masking if needed, which is kind of the way it ought to be done, right? And the kind of the way that Republicans used to back in the olden days, and they pretended to have an ideology, advocated that things should be done with local control. And as a matter of fact, it is the way that the law is enshrined here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's enshrined in the Constitution. The Constitution says that local school boards have that responsibility and retain that prerogative. Glenn Youngkin says, no. In order to be Trumpy, I need to order that no one is allowed to have a mandate, despite the mandate in the Constitution for local control. And I will fight you over this. By the way, as you may recall, it was done by executive order. And then we had a little tussle last weekend, I think, or maybe even the weekend before, with somebody who may or may not even be Virginian, but a conservative, taking the Youngkin position on this thing and saying, they're breaking the law, these county school systems that are defying the mandate. I mentioned to you on the show before that 50+% of school districts in Virginia are, in fact, saying, telling the governor to go fly a kite, as they used to say back in the day when, I don't know, when you couldn't say go to hell or take a flying leap or whatever. But telling them, no, we're going to maintain our mask mandates under the constitutional prerogative that we're granted. But this person that I was, squabbling briefly with over this thing said, well, no. If you issue an executive order and people defy it, that's breaking the law. And I had said, well, it's defying an order. I don't know if it's breaking a law. There's no law yet. Well, it has the force of law. When you get on an airplane and they tell you have to wear a mask, it's because they say in compliance with federal law. And I don't really know that they actually say that. They say in compliance with federal law you can't tamper with the smoke detectors. I don't know what they say about the masks. I'm not on planes that often. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're conflating it. Maybe they're not. I just thought it was sort of an interesting thing. She was insistent that people conflate the executive order with law, which it really, why not be precise in your language? But at any rate, she said it was effectively breaking the law until a court, of competent jurisdiction, say either rules otherwise or issues a restraining order or a temporary stay on the enforcement of the executive order. And the news is, okay, we've got that now. On Friday, we saw that come through. A judge in somewhere, I think in Arlington County, has come through with that order. Yeah, here it is. I have the tweet of Julie Carey from NBC breaking back on Friday, February 4th, an initial win for school boards which have decided to keep universal masking in place. An Arlington judge has granted their request for a temporary restraining order. And here's, I guess, the important part of that restraining order. Having addressed all aspects of whether a temporary restraining order should issue, the court concludes that the school board's motion for temporary restraining order, TRO for all those hipsters who like lingo, with regard to optional masking of school children should be granted, and the court will issue an appropriate order effective immediately. Plaintiff's counsel will circulate and submit an order directly to judge's chamber for entry. That gives the plaintiffs the chance to draft the order, make it easy for the judge. Anyway, it goes on, not at length really. This is the end. But judge here is Louise DiMatteo, who has, of course, already found her life threatened for it, and found people on Twitter already saying, this is, who did I don't know, some jackass. Did I put this away? Did I retweet it just to illustrate what was going on? I don't know. Like I said, I should scroll through my Twitter feed, but already they're circulating it with comments like, this judge has an address, Everybody should make her life so uncomfortable she has to move. That's really not the way we're supposed to respond to rulings from competent or courts of competent jurisdiction, but that's where we are with Republicans today. So I don't know. Should I look for that one? What was that? I think I can find that tweet probably and search it out. Let's see. Will I find it if I just look for judge, address, uncomfortable? I think I have the wording right. I bet I can come up with that pretty quickly if that's right. Yeah, I don't know. Let's see. I have to look for the latest version of those things. Yeah, there it is. Roger Harford, whoever that is, tweeting on February 4th, that judge has an address. Make him, said it was him, but it isn't, so uncomfortable he has to move. Just by way of proof, I will mark that one for you and share it with you. That, like I say, that's where we are with Republicans these days. What else is in pocket that I can do quickly here? Oh yeah, we've covered that. That one is about Joe Rogan, and Greg touched on that. Here's the Washington Post story about the article about the things retrieved from Mar-a-Lago, which we should read, but just blowing past it because I want to see what other fun things we get there. I got 2 fun threads uncovering the weirdness about the GoFundMe campaign for the truck caravan up in Canada. But the news articles that Greg read cover the essentials here. Oh, yes. There's an interesting claim hovering out there that we should probably look into that I think might be a misreading. I'm not positive of the way it's being read here, but one claim floating out there is that the continued destruction of presidential records, especially once the president was warned that he really needed to retain these records, might carry its own penalty and even jail sentence and even a bar from federal office. However, I'm not certain that we're reading things correctly. One of the many tweets circulating this idea points to a CRS report and a footnote in that CRS report that says that under Title 18, Section 2071 of the U.S. Code, anyone found guilty of, quote, willfully and unlawfully, unquote, concealing, removing, mutilating, obliterating, destroying, or attempting to do any such action against a record can be fined and imprisoned for up to 3 years. In addition to fines and possible imprisonment, anyone holding federal office who is convicted of this crime can lose his or her position and be disqualified from holding federal office in the future. Sounds very promising. Of course, one of the things you have to sort out is this is footnote 22, and there's a screen grab of this piece of the CRS report. And up at the top of the screen grab, it says disposal of presidential records and begins to discuss that. And then there's only like 2 lines before the page ends and the footnotes begin. And the footnote, again, is footnote 22. But at the beginning of the discussion of the disposal of presidential records, I said there's only 2 lines on this page. There is a footnote in just those 2 lines. That's footnote 29, which suggests that footnote 22 comes from a different discussion, though it's clearly about, the CRS report is about the disposal of presidential records and the enforcement of the Presidential Records Act. And if you go and you look at section or 18, Title 18, Section 2071. Did I bookmark that? I may have. No, I didn't bother because I think you could just go and look it up. But what was it? 18 U.S. Code 2071 it is a records retention law, but it's not entirely clear that it's part of the Presidential Records Act. 18 U.S. Code 2071, concealment, removal, or mutilation, generally. So, removal, that's something, right? He's removed things to Mar-a-Lago. Mutilation, sure, he did that. Well, here's the text. Whoever willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, or destroys, or attempts to do so, or with intent to do so, takes and carries away any record, proceeding, map, book, paper, document, or other thing, that's all, that's pretty inclusive, right? But there's more to the thing. Again, 18 U.S. Code 2071, Section A. Whoever does any of this crappy stuff to any of the important records, proceeding, record, proceeding, map, book, paper, document, or other thing, filed or deposited with any clerk or officer of any court of the United States. Oh, that was missing from the details in the footnote. Or in any public office. Okay, that's a public office. Or with any judicial or public officer of the United States. Maybe. Shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. Then Section B. Whoever, having the custody of any such record, proceeding, map, book, document, paper, or other thing, willfully and unlawfully conceals, removes, mutilates, obliterates, falsifies, or destroys the same, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both, and shall forfeit his office and be disqualified from holding any office under the United States. Okay. As used in this subsection, the term office does not include the office held by any person as a retired officer of the Armed Forces of the United States. All right, so that's not particularly applicable, the part about retired officers of the United States Armed Forces, but, maybe. But I couldn't figure out why. So I wanted to take a look at the CRS report that they're talking about here, and at least one version of it from December 17th, 2019 exists, and this footnote exists in it, and it's the same number, I think. It's from the Presidential Records Act, an overview, and I believe it's on page 5 of the report that they begin discussing disposal of presidential records. So here's the part of the report that has the screen grab. Here's disposal of presidential records. There's footnote 22. There's the discussion of the disposal of presidential records, footnoting to footnote 29 in those 2 lines. So this is definitely a rough equivalent, if not the exact same document that this came from. This is custody. The larger section that we're talking about here is custody and control of presidential records. Policies concerning the custody of presidential materials informs the way such information is controlled, accessed, and released during and after a president's time in office. Prior to the PRA's enactment, presidential papers were traditionally the private property of the president, who could then donate the materials to institutions for public consumption. The PRA fundamentally changed the status of presidential records as publicly owned materials. The PRA is explicit. That's good. And they quote here, the United States shall reserve and retain complete ownership, possession, and control of presidential records, and such records shall be administered in accordance with the provisions of this chapter. But then what happens if you don't? In passing the PRA, Congress required that public access to the materials would be consistent under standards fixed in law. The PRA provides records, maintenance, and permissions depending on whether a presidency is in progress or has concluded. All very interesting as setup, but none of which contains footnote 22. Footnote 22 actually is in the section before this, which I'll have to scroll back and see what we're talking about. Here we are. Who decides if information is a presidential record? Oh, well, that seems like I guess if it's an open question. And footnote 22, the one that says you can get in real trouble, is from this section. Be interesting to find out what's going on here. While statute allows for materials relating to campaign events and private political associations to be considered personal records, so long as the materials have no relation to or direct effect upon the carrying out of the president's various duties. Might be the case, say, for the letter from Barack Obama, but maybe less so with the letter from Kim Jong-un. Anyway, so long as the materials have no relation to or direct effect upon the carrying out of the president's various duties, critically, the president has a high degree of discretion over what materials are to be preserved under the PRA. That'll make things difficult. NARA, the National Archives and Records Administration, I guess. Anyway, it's the National Archives for short. NARA does not have direct oversight authority over the White House records program as it does over federal agencies' records programs. Instead, the Archives provides advice and assistance to the White House on records management practices upon request, which request I'm sure was never made from the Trump White House, which would appear to give the president discretion over which materials might be included under the PRA. And that's footnote 21. Now here comes the material that leads up to footnote 22, I guess. As noted previously, whether these records are classified as presidential or personal records affects public and congressional access to such materials. For example, the PRA does not provide an access mechanism for personal records. In the event of potentially unlawful removal or destruction of government records, Title 44, Section 3106 of the U.S. Code requires the head of a federal agency to notify the archivist, who initiates action with the Attorney General for the possible recovery of such records. There is where footnote 22 comes in. So what's interesting is footnote 22, as we said, is to Title 18, Section 2071, and yet right before the footnote they say that it's actually Title 44, Section 3106 that might obtain here. In the event of potentially unlawful removal or destruction of government records, Title 44, Section 3106 of the Code requires the head of a federal agency to notify the archivist who initiates action with the Attorney General. So, I mean, I guess that's funny. Ordinarily, I guess that would be, well, would President Trump be the head of his, if the White House is the one destroying things, what federal agency are we talking about? Would Trump notify the archivist that he was destroying documents? No. Does that power now fall to the White House under Joe Biden? Maybe. Let's go see what Title 44 U.S. Code, what was the number on that thing? That we were just reading about? Oh, it's, here we go, 3106. Oh, we'll do the Joe Rogan thing, 3106. Look it up and have a look. Unlawful removal, destruction of records. A, federal agency notification. See, what are we talking about here? Might have to back up a couple of sections to see who does this apply to. The head of each federal agency shall notify the archivist of any actual, impending, or threatened unlawful removal, defacing, alteration, corruption, deletion, erasure, and other destruction of records in the custody of the agency, which I'm sure Trump's lawyers would say, we're not an agency, so you can't apply this to us. And that might be true. Let's back up a couple of things here and see what body of law we're in here. Yeah, I mean, this is all sort of 44 U.S. Code 3101, records management by agency heads, general duties. I don't know. That may or may not apply to the President of the United States. So, I don't know. Still a question mark. We'll have to sort this out, and probably not a good thing to do at this point. It wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be to sort it out on the radio. But big question mark, I would say, in terms of whether or not the tweets circulating saying that 18 U.S. Code 2071 actually gives you a mechanism to disqualify Trump for, say, holding the presidency or running for office in 2024. Worth checking, but I wouldn't bank on it just yet. All right, let's see. We have this background note here from Darwin, who says, Rogan was indeed a, quote, comedian. He has actual stand-up clips on YouTube. Spotify didn't buy those, I guess. So that probably tells you a little bit about, well, they know where he was successful, quote-unquote successful, I guess, as a podcaster more so than a comedian. Although it might be interesting to look and see what sort of comedy was he actually trying to sell here. Oh, here's another news story that I was thinking might be worth our time, but probably would be something that Greg would want to comment on. But, we'll save him the time. One of the weekend events included, here, I should just be scrolling through my own Twitter feed again here, a weekend episode involving the very, I guess, thin-skinned people working for Governor Glenn Youngkin. Apparently, Youngkin criticized over the weekend by a Democratic activist of high school age, and the Youngkin campaign apparatus found it necessary, for whatever reason, to actually attack this kid, which seems like, well, maybe not a great use of their time and maybe overstepping various boundaries that we ordinarily might want government officials to respect when it comes to dealing with, underage kids. I see the activist himself. Let's see, I have his Facebook, I guess, post about the incident, but I think if I scroll a little further down, there'll be a little bit of discussion of the actual event. No, maybe not. That might be parked in Pocket as well, but I can at least find the kids' discussion of it on Facebook. Ethan Lynn is who we're talking about, and you may find him on Twitter as Ethan C. Lynn, Lynne. And he describes things this way. Last night, the governor's official campaign account attacked me, a high school senior and 17-year-old, on Twitter. I want to thank everyone for all the calls and texts of support. They've deleted it. That's good news. But I have received no communication from the governor's office. In school, we are taught how to spot bullying, and their tweet last night perfectly fit that description. It is disgusting, disturbing, and unbecoming of the Commonwealth to see the governor and his office stoop this low, especially on a public platform. We all know that Youngkin has an agenda to attack and endanger students, and last night proved that. I will not be intimidated by these attacks and will continue to be a voice for students across the Commonwealth. Good for you. It was pretty weird to see, for sure. Not what anybody expected. I wish I could. Maybe Pocket has some description of the actual exchange, but now I can't be certain of that. And I'm trying to remember exactly what the dust-up was about. And it turns out that I do not remember, and it's not that easily retrievable. But anyway, I'll put that on the record, and we'll note that and see if we can go back and find this thing and track down exactly what it was. Maybe during the next break I can locate that. But yeah, it was pretty remarkable. I'm sure it was probably about, I wonder if it was about masking in schools or not. But yeah, it was pretty disturbing. And though the campaign deleted the tweet, apparently they put up a new one that was basically saying, well, he's no just ordinary 17-year-old. He's worked on several campaigns. He's an operative. He should be used to this sort of thing by now. But 17 is 17, and, you probably didn't need to take that kind of a shot. Anyway, I'll see if I can find that over the break And, then we'll dive into some of the materials that we have, perhaps about what the former guy has been up to in hiding papers and trying to find out exactly what's been down at Pervalago and how many things he was tearing up and what people are going to do about it. But there's plenty more to catch up on. And I did do some reading over the weekend about what happens when the House has to decide whether or not the House has to decide who's going to be president in the event of an electoral tie. Found out a little bit about the procedure. It's nothing super exciting, and it's kind of the way you expected it might go, but maybe I can update you on that after this.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So did you want to find out first about how the House votes when it has to decide who the president is going to be in the event that no one gets a majority of electoral votes? Well, they haven't done it that often, but it has happened, and it's happened, twice, I think, in history, but under the current rules, it's never actually happened under what passes for current rules. It hasn't happened for 2 centuries or so, and the rules were slightly different. It happened the first time in the election between, very early on, in the election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, with the weird result between that and the fact that there was no formal recognition of presidential tickets with vice presidents running as in a team effort with presidential candidates, and they ended up with the weird result of the guy with the most votes getting the presidency and the guy with the second most votes getting the vice presidency, and that must have been contentious, and it was. And that was, of course, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And then they came around and tinkered with it in Congress and said, this isn't the way we meant for this to go, and they came up with a different procedure. And they've changed the procedure since then, or at least, tinkered around the edges. But the process of casting those votes might be relatively similar. But our question on, Thursday, Friday, was did the individual House members vote as they might for speaker, that is standing one at a time and shouting out who their vote is for, and then someone does the work of writing all that stuff down and then dividing them up by the states and then saying, okay, well, this many people from New York voted for candidate A, and this many people from New York voted for candidate B. And by the way, there would also be candidate C, because as it turns out in the constitutional outlines for how this is going to work, the House decides as among the top 3 electoral vote getters. Now, sometimes there are only 2 electoral vote getters, I guess. But as we were discussing the other day, if anyone were to try to, and were able to successfully bar Trump from the ballot in certain states where the elections authorities were of the opinion that his participation in insurrection barred him from federal service and therefore barred him from the ballot, and that the Trump campaign had someone run as the Republican nominee in those states as a stand-in for Trump in order to deny Biden, or at least possibly deny Biden some of their electoral votes, some of the electoral votes he would otherwise have won in that state. I don't know whether he would, succeed in that effort, but it's a possibility that there could be some third person for whom electoral votes are cast. At any rate, the House contest contemplates up to 3 electoral vote getters in a 3-way contest. The Senate, by contrast, in choosing the vice president, turns out to limit itself to the top 2 electoral vote getters for vice president. I'm not certain for the reason of the, for the disparity, but I'm sure they had some strategic thought worked out there. At any rate, the other possibility was that they would vote 1776, the musical style, and that each state would caucus and they would canvass their members and find out who was casting votes for whom and figure it out among themselves and then cast one state's vote. Apparently, in the past, when this has been done, that's the way they've done it. The states get together as states and try and work out an answer and then submit a state vote. In addition, there was also discussion of how would they actually cast those votes. Are they secret ballots? Are they discussion and debate and then open voting, or what? And apparently, I guess the original 12th Amendment language calls for a ballot, and that in the one election post Adams Jefferson, for which the 12th Amendment had been adopted, and we went to what they call this contingent election of the president, that is to have the House decide who the president would be because of an electoral tie or failure for anyone to get a majority. The process was 2-step and secret in both cases. That is, the members of each delegation were permitted to, or required to, submit a secret paper ballot containing their vote to the, I don't know how they decided on the chairperson for each state, but they were each provided with a ballot box and paper, and I guess quill pens, because that's what you used back in the day. And this is like 1825, 35, something around then, and we're talking about, I guess it would have been 25. So after the election of 1824, and they were settling things, as I recall, as between Andrew Jackson, who doesn't win this time, but wins the next time around, and John Quincy Adams. Is that right? Anyway, so they could, the point of my bringing that up was that they could very well be using quill pens at that point. I don't know what they were using, but at any rate, we're talking about that long ago. And they chose John Quincy Adams in the end, by the way, and there's all sorts of controversy about how that happened. You might recall the phrase corrupt bargain, and we're not talking about everything else in the United States history that's been a corrupt bargain, but this was the original corrupt bargain. That is to say, I think it was Henry Clay was also one of the contestants for the presidency. I don't know whether he was one of the top 3 electoral vote getters. I did read something about it last night. It may have been that he was, and anyway, he threw his support to John Quincy Adams, and everybody expected that, oh, well, he did that because he figures if Adams wins, he'll get a prime job of some kind in the Adams administration, and he did. Although it was, I don't know, these days you'd question whether or not that was going to be the outcome because Clay was the Speaker of the House, and you might prefer to stay. These days, I would think Speaker of the House is a better position than anything you would get in the administration as a Secretary of anything. But back then, the Secretary of State was considered the, always a successor possibility for the presidency, so things were different. Anyway, the point is they gave each state a ballot box, and then there were 2 ballot boxes for the state's votes out on the floor, and the vote was by secret ballot. Each member of Congress would take maybe a quill pen and scratch out who he was voting for and drop it in the state box, and then the state chair, however that was selected, whether that was the dean of the delegation, I don't know, they don't discuss that, would tally up the votes, and usually there's not very many of them, and back in 1835 or 1825 there weren't that many representatives from each of the states even, so it was an easy thing to do, and then they would from that determine how the state would vote. And if the state either was tied, or I think the rule, if as I recall reading it, was if the state didn't have a majority vote for one candidate or another, if it was split three ways, you would write out, divided on the state ballot and drop it in there. And then somebody, I don't know, they had tellers, I guess they would appoint, who would total up the votes by state from those slips dropped in the state voting box. But the point was, one, that each individual member voted, but two, that they voted by secret ballot, which is an interesting twist because it does raise the possibility that, I don't think it's very likely these days. I also don't think it's very likely these days for them to allow them to do it by secret ballot. I think that they might, in fact, demand that there be open voting. But if it was secret ballot, it would open the door for certain, say, possibly some Republicans saying, if it were public, I really would be intimidated into voting for Trump. But because it's secret and I think he's a danger for democracy, I'm going to vote something else, whether it's for Biden, I don't know, or maybe some other person or something, or even abstain. And then, of course, it would be very difficult to keep that a secret because there would be efforts on to, interview every member of Congress and get a statement for the record. Did you vote for Trump or not? At least among the Republicans. They could lie. Secret ballot, I guess, makes that possible. But not at all clear that they would remain secret ballots in the modern context. And there's no rules that say what is. In fact, it turns out that the House would very likely have to come up with a new set of rules for the procedure. And it's questionable who would even come up with those rules, by the way. There's, reason to believe that the House Rules Committee would have jurisdiction and would write those rules, whether the ballot was going to be secret or otherwise. And there's reason to believe, there's a faint claim that the Judiciary Committee, by virtue of its handling of constitutional matters, might claim jurisdiction to write the rules for the contingent vote. There's strong precedent, stronger than for the Judiciary Committee, stronger even than for the claim of the Rules Committee, that the House Administration Committee would be the one that writes the rules. And in fact, I think the predecessor to the House Administration Committee was the one who wrote the rules, the committee that ended up writing the rules in 1825. So one, there's precedent there. And two, like I said, the claim is stronger than you think. It's the House Administration Committee, by the way, who provides the tellers for the routine counting of the electoral votes that we do now when there's a real winner and everybody knows it. So who was it this time around? Zoe Lofgren, I think, is the chair of the House Administration Committee and was therefore one of the tellers. So the chair and ranking member were the House tellers, and their counterparts on the Senate side, who I think are from the Senate Rules Committee, were the other two tellers. So there's a strong claim there for them writing the rules, since they are ordinarily intimately involved in the electoral vote counting anyway. So, just sort of weird in the weeds, interesting sorts of facts and things to think about, like, oh yeah, I guess they would have to write those rules. So they would be the ones to decide whether or not we would do it by secret ballot. But the basics appear to be that you break up by states and you do the polling inside the state delegation, and then the state delegation submits the vote. I guess it's worth asking now in the modern context. This whole thing is about, well, how would this work in the modern context? The very modern context, the current context, would have to include the possibility of just outright cheating, by the way. I don't know if it would ever work out that the dean of a delegation with a significant enough number of members that you could get away with this. I mean, you wouldn't get away with it, but you would even attempt to try it. You'd have to have, 10, 15 members of a delegation in order for this to work. I don't know if there's any places where that is the case and where the dean of the delegation and the delegation is closely divided and the dean is Republican, such that, for instance, let's say you had a 15-member delegation and 8 of them were Democrats and 7 of them Republicans. But the dean of the delegation, which, is, I don't even know how the rules on the dean go. It's typically the most senior member of the majority party. But if in 2025 the majority party is Republican, then the dean of the House would be Republican. But I'm not certain that works, because now that I think about it, I think I've seen situations where the majority was Republican, but say John Dingell was still regarded as the dean of the House, because there's not a whole lot of power that goes along with being the dean of the House, but there are a few ceremonial things. But if you're not a cheater and not inclined to be a cheater, then it's ministerial and there's no real power involved. And I'm not certain that the dean of the House state delegations would be chosen by the same method. But if it were the case that a Republican dean of the delegation received the votes of a delegation that was majority Democratic, and again here, do they have a role for the dean of the delegation? This would probably be part of the rules as written maybe by the House Administration Committee, maybe by others. See how confusing this can be? The rules might be, no, it's the majority by state delegation, so that if the Republicans are the majority in the House, but the Democrats are the majority in this delegation, then the dean of the delegation has to be Democratic, or it might not be that. It might just be the longest serving member of the House delegation. What if you have an 8-7 Democratic delegation, but a Republican dean who counts the votes and is called upon to announce the vote of the state or submit the vote of the state on paper, whatever the rules say, and just says, what if I just fudge it? There were 8 votes for Joe Biden and 7 votes for Donald Trump, but what if I just write down Donald Trump? And now if there's secret ballots, how do you audit that? Like, oh my God, maybe, I don't know. But I guess you just open the papers and find out. But like, what do you do with a dean of a delegation who reports that Donald Trump won his state's electoral votes in a contingent election? And right immediately everybody's going to say, I know that state is 8 Dems, 7 Republicans. That seems fishy to me. I want to see the ballots. Like, can the dean of the state object and say the House has no right to inspect the secret ballots because he doesn't want to get caught? And if it's a Republican majority in the House, presumably somebody, I don't know, does somebody say, well, bring this to a vote? And the Republicans say, yeah, no inspection of the state ballots. What do you do with that? But everybody knows that, well, somebody had an attack of conscience and decided that Donald Trump ought to be the winner for the good of the country. Maybe they were afraid of riots, and that's the only reason they did it. And that's not a good reason, but that doesn't have to be a good reason. The rules don't say anything about the reason being good. I don't know, man. And if it's the House Administration Committee, who's the current ranking Republican in the House Administration Committee? Just wondering. Let's see. I don't know that it would be the same in next year's Congress, but if the House goes Republican, as some people say may happen in the next election. Let's see. Show me the membership. Oh, yes, right. Rodney Davis. And weren't we just a little bit weirded out by that guy, and isn't he a little strange? I feel like I've talked about him a little bit at some point, probably because we were discussing who the tellers were going to be and trying to figure out, is he a normal guy or not? Let's see. What did I say about him when we were talking about him? I'm sure I've tweeted about him in the past. Rodney Davis. Did I have any information on him? Let's see. So, yeah, I don't know anything about the guy. So, you tell me. Where's he from? Illinois 13th. I don't remember whether he was like a normal dude or not. Who else do they have to choose from? At the moment on the House Administration Committee, the minority only has 3 members on the committee. The majority Democrats have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So heavily stacked, as you can see, like the Rules Committee. They don't like to lose votes in the House Administration Committee. The other Republicans are Barry Loudermilk of Georgia's 11th District and Wisconsin 1st District, Brian Steil, S-T-E-I-L. I know someone who uses that last name and uses the style pronunciation, but I don't know about Brian from Wisconsin. But anyway, I don't know. Interesting questions. Probably stuff that's too weedy and hasn't been considered anywhere else, which is why it makes for perfect material for here. And the fact that there are probably no standing rules for it, and that even if there were, if we then said, Zoe, we said to Zoe Lofgren, whose name is actually pronounced, I think, Zoe Lofgren, Zoe, I want you to get cracking and write some rules for a contingent election in a modern context that include auditing procedures and what to do with lying deans, and that maybe what you really need to do here is say that each state has to select its own dean, and that the dean or chairperson of the state delegation should be the most senior member of the majority of that state's delegation, regardless of who holds the majority overall in the House. Except that if you did that, then those rules, if they wanted to cheat, would just be scrapped in the next Congress and rewritten, and it would be that much easier for them to come up with a set of contingent election rules if we did the work of writing a complete set that they could just then edit. So maybe it's not worth doing that. And I don't know. Basically, nobody knows how it would work exactly because they'd have to make it up as they went along. And how it goes depends on who's making it up. And it's entirely possible that a Republican-controlled House Administration Committee full of bitter partisans would be responsible for writing these things. And they could absolutely, if they thought ahead in all this, and, it's very likely that they will not have. Now I'm ruining it by thinking ahead for them. They could write very partisan rules for how this goes and possibly grant the power to cheat even in this, even though you should be able, if we believe that everyone will simply vote their party line, you should be able to predict this thing pretty well. But there was some interesting discussion in this CRS report on the Presidential Records Act, reminding everybody that there are several ways that you could decide to cast your vote. You could cast your vote simply for your party's candidate for president. You could decide to cast your vote for whoever won the popular vote in your state. You could decide to cast your vote for whoever won the popular vote in your district of your state. You could decide, to hell with all of it, I will vote my conscience, or give you my best judgment. Or you could say, I will get drunk and throw darts at a board. There's all sorts of ways that you could choose to do this stuff. And there's no one way, and there's no way for the rules to prescribe you from using one or the other. So, you never know how people will come down. What was the old quote that they used here in terms of how to decide your ballot? It's the famous formulation of Edmund Burke's, right? Here it is. Your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. It's one of those things that you can do, right? The majority of my district and state voted for candidate X, but I'm voting for candidate Y because of my judgment. And remember that there's a third person thrown in there too, sometimes. Anyway, all very confusing and has the potential for a lot more confusion. And isn't that great? Isn't that what you really want out of life, to not have any idea who could become president in 2025? It will be just fantastic. Anyway, let's see. Like I said, many things for us to consider in all of this. I think this was the most KITM of those that we could have considered. Let's throw in this additional comment. Because you've likely already read the stories about the shredding of documents, maybe already read the one about what was found in Mar-a-Lago, I will give you this note from Empty Wheel from the other day. She was, in that case, commenting on which of these two stories. I have to click through to find out. Yes, the Washington Post piece. He never stopped ripping things up inside Trump's relentless document destruction habits. Well worth reading. I might even spend some time on it tomorrow. But I think it predates the revelation of the Mar-a-Lago cache of documents. But as Empty Wheel points out here, this is a story about Trump tearing things up. But she says, this paragraph appears not to be. And she's taken a screen grab of this one particular instance, probably worth finding out about. One senior Trump White House official said he and other White House staffers frequently put documents into, quote, burn bags to be destroyed rather than preserving them, and would decide themselves what should be saved and what should be burned. When the January 6th committee asked for certain documents related to Trump's efforts to pressure Vice President Mike Pence, for example, some of them no longer existed in this person's files because they had already been shredded, said someone familiar with the request. So, yes, what she's pointing out here is, yes, the headline is about Trump's weird and wacky habit of just tearing things up. And gosh, they just couldn't get him to stop it. But it was never really intended to be. It was just his habit and how he disposed of documents. And don't worry about it. But this points out, no. Somebody else was doing the same. Somebody else who was senior in the White House and would have been expected to have, and was known to have been in possession, I guess, at some point, of the documents describing Trump's efforts to pressure Mike Pence, but didn't have them because they were gone. And this is a person who is not Donald Trump, who doesn't have the excuse, if it even is one, of being in the habit of tearing up papers all the time anyway, with no particular relevance to the action, but instead had shredded the documents and or sent them to be burned by the military rather than preserving them. A person who is not Donald Trump. So good catch here. The whole thing is about Mr. Goofy, Mr. Trump, and his silly little habit, but somebody else has actual evidence and went out of their way to destroy it, even though they didn't have that kooky habit to begin with. So well worth reminding everybody about. And I think that probably brings us to the end of our space for fully considering any of these fully developed stories. Yeah, I guess so. So that's it for the day, and yet we have a couple of seconds left here in order to, before we get to the end of today's show, or at least the cue to begin the music to end today's show. But there's that cue, so now we've got that. But we have 44 seconds before we're supposed to play that music. All right. Well, let's say we can probably hint at another story that we probably ought to be taking a look at, since Steve Bannon and Bannon-adjacent activities did make it into our discussion. Washington Post article from a couple of days ago, Steve Bannon was deplatformed, but an obscure media mogul keeps him on the air. Who is this obscure person, and should we de-obscure him, unobscure him? What's the word for that? War Room, his podcast, is at the center of a fledgling network monetizing what some employees saw as Trump propaganda, because that's what it is. This, though, goes all the way back to January 25th, practically ancient history. by Isaac Stanley Becker. 2 years after being cast out of the White House, Stephen K.G.B. Bannon spoke from a steep, dusty hill outside of El Paso asking for donations. That was for the wall building effort that eventually landed him in legal trouble. Not many news outlets were paying attention except for one focusing on his every word. It wasn't Fox or Newsmax. It wasn't even Breitbart News, the far-right website Bannon once led, using it to help remake the GOP and elect Trump. The coverage came from an upstart network run by a little-known media mogul in Colorado, a felon with a record of unpaid taxes and a family history marked by tragedy and violence. The mogul, Robert J. Sigg, S-I-G-G, found news value in Bannon's mission to the desert, which ultimately resulted in fraud charges. When Bannon launched his own talk show in the fall of 2019, calling it War Room, he quickly handed over its distribution to SIG. The network he's working on, Real America's Voice, helped sustain Bannon despite his removal from YouTube, Spotify, hint, hint, and other mainstream platforms, even though Spotify won't get rid of the Bannon-adjacent Joe Rogan. Oh well. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about what's coming up in full next.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
That's right. What's next is the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, where they finish the articles that they begin discussing. A very unique practice. We might have to adopt that at some point. Let's see what's up first. Mike Pence thought he had a clear road to the presidency. Now he's in a delicate balancing act, to say the least. You know what that's about. But stay tuned for Justice's Take next.